mark of the beast, 666, a prophecy from 2,000 years ago. It's a part of our culture. It's made its way into movies, songs, books. Kids talk about it. How many people, though, know that technological developments in the last 10 or 20 years could be combining to make the mark of the beast a reality, and possibly even in our lifetimes? I'm Catherine Albrecht, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the mark of the beast and about my own research over the last 4 years into the technological developments that have revolutionized and changed the way things are bought and sold on the planet Earth. I'll be talking to you about ways that will be developing at an incredible pace in the future, and some technological breakthroughs that are right on the brink of happening. And I believe that by the time we're finished with this, you will see many of the ways in which the mark of the beast could become a reality in our lifetimes. First, let me start out by saying this question, what is the mark of the beast, has occupied the minds of Christian scholars ever since it was first written down 2,000 years ago. In fact, I have in my hands a book, and this is one of my favorite books. It's called The Contribution, this is very dry and academic, I'll warn you, The Contribution of British Writers Between 1560 and 1830 to the Interpretation of Revelation 13, 16 through 18. 3 little tiny biblical passages and over 330 pages of very dense scholarly research on just about a 250-year span of time in just one piece of the globe. An extraordinary amount of human ingenuity, intelligence, and energy has gone into trying to interpret the meaning of these passages, Revelations 13, 16 through 18. And what we will learn by the end of today is that much of this energy was probably wasted because it came before its time. Hundreds, if not thousands, of scholars have put thousands of pages of pen to paper to try to explain it. And yet this may be the first generation to actually understand what the mark of the beast may be. Let me start by reading the section of Revelations about which this entire book was written, the 3 little passages from the book of Revelations, the ending book of the Bible. And it says, he being the second of 2 beasts in the end times, he also forced everyone small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that none could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. Now, what does this mean to have a mark without which you cannot buy or sell? Well, first of all, let me tell you that this particular passage is the entire reason why I am a Christian. And let me give you a little bit of my own personal background and history, and you can see how I've come to be so interested in the topic and why I've spent so much of my life devoted to trying to learn more about it. When I was a little girl, at age 8, in a little town in the Midwest, my grandmother took me to the grocery store. My mother was actually working on her master's thesis at the time, and which may explain why I have a penchant towards academic things myself and why I'm such a researcher. I'm actually working on a doctorate in consumer privacy issues at Harvard University. But at that time, I was an 8-year-old girl in the Midwest on a mink ranch, and my grandmother and I had just gotten back from grocery shopping. And as we put the groceries away, and we had the bags sitting there on the floor, she said, "Kathy," and at that time I was Kathy, not Catherine. She said, "Sit down, I have something really important I want to tell you." And I said, "Okay, Grandma." And I sat down at the kitchen table, the big wooden table. I still remember the way the light came through the window of that kitchen. And she said, "This is really important. You have to know this. There will come a time when people on the earth will not be able to buy or sell unless they have a number and unless they take a mark, which will be the mark of the beast." And I'm actually quite glad my grandmother told me that when she did, because she died a year later. I miss her very much to this day. But she explained to me that this would be coming some point in the distant future. And as I looked across the kitchen and I saw the grocery bags from our shopping trip there, I said, "Grandma, you mean even groceries, even food?" She said, "Especially food. That's how they're going to get people to sign up. Because if you can't buy food, you can't survive. And that's what's going to cause the masses of humanity to sign up for the mark of the beast." Now, sitting in that little kitchen in the Midwest at age 8, I made a couple of decisions. And the first decision I made was that I would pass this on to my grandkids, so they could pass it on to their grandkids and their grandkids. And someday, thousands of years later, when this prophecy came to pass, my descendants would know not to participate in this whole scheme of the mark of the beast. They'd know not to take it. And the second decision I made was that if it did happen in my lifetime, which seemed incredibly unlikely, this was the early 1970s. In fact, there were hardly barcodes, and there weren't credit cards, and if there were, I hadn't seen them. There were not computers. The ones that were took up whole rooms of buildings and certainly weren't in stores. At that time, this seemed like such an outlandishly unlikely thing to ever happen in my lifetime that I made a promise that if it did happen in my lifetime, I would pull out my Bible and I would read very carefully, and I would know that the words in the Bible were true. Now, one of the things I liken this to is if someone had sat me down and said, someday there's going to be a big purple flower and it's going to cover 2/3 of the sky, and when you see that, that Hopi prophecy, whatever it is, then take that seriously. The unlikeliness of that would make you pay attention. Well, in the early 1970s, this truly was an outlandish thought, that everyone on the planet, first of all, could even be identified, and that everyone on the planet could be forced to somehow take a number to buy or sell, just didn't make sense to my little brain. Now, about 5 years ago, in studying supermarket loyalty cards, which I actually started studying just because I found them annoying, and I didn't like the idea of somebody tracking my purchases through a piece of plastic, it began to occur to me that by presenting that piece of plastic on my supermarket loyalty card, that I actually was presenting a number in order to buy or sell. Now, I suppose I was doing the same thing when I presented a credit card to make a purchase, because a credit card takes a number, links that number up with you into a database, which is a number to count, and pulls that money out, and no real money ever changes hands when you scan a credit card. It's really paying with a number. And the more I began to think about that, the more I began to think about all of the cards in my wallet, and the fact that every single one of those cards contained a number, and that every one of them was linked up to a database, and they all involved this information moving around through computers, which is all digital information. And the more I thought about that, the more my grandmother's words came back to me. And I started to say, maybe it's time to pay attention a little bit to these numbers that we're using to make purchases, to buy and sell. And that is what got me started to launch an organization called Caspian, which is Consumers Against Supermarket Privacy Invasion and Numbering. Christians in the audience may know that C.S. Lewis, the wonderful Christian theologian, authored a series of children's books, the first of which is called The Chronicles of Narnia, or The Chronicles of Narnia. The first one is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Many people may have read that. And one of those books contains a character, Prince Caspian, and in fact, two of the books. And in one of them, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, Prince Caspian actually sails out to these islands and encounters lots of things going wrong and tries to right some wrongs that he comes across. And I felt at that point that the kind of privacy invasion that I was seeing with these supermarket cards that were registering people's information in databases, that perhaps Prince Caspian would be an appropriate role model to go out and do some exploration, do a little bit of learning, and hopefully right some wrongs that I encountered when I was out there. And also the Christian reference and the wonderful experience of reading C.S. Lewis as a child helped in coming up with that name. So what I found as I began to look into the numbered systems is that there is a huge movement afoot across the globe to move all payments towards numerical systems, and possibly to move them towards mark systems. And let's dive in and see how this particular piece of prophecy may be coming true in a way that it couldn't have done in the early 1970s, and particularly not 2,000 years ago. The first word I want to draw your attention to here is forced everyone. Now, everyone is an important word here. It means literally everyone. And in fact, in case that wasn't clear, the author actually clarifies it for us. Small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, I mean literally everyone. Now, 2,000 years ago, identifying even the boundaries of the planet Earth was not possible. There were continents that did not know of the existence of other continents. There were peoples in certain places that didn't know there were people on the other side of mountain ranges even. So the idea that everyone on the planet could be identified, or even that the entire planet itself could be identified as a unit, was actually pretty far-fetched 2,000 years ago. Nowadays, we know that we can identify everyone on the planet. We can watch every piece of the planet from satellites in space. And in fact, we are on the brink of having made contact with or identified every person on the planet. This month's National Geographic, this is August of 2003, had a cover called The Hidden Tribes of the Amazon. And in the hidden tribes of the Amazon, in that article, it was explained that only 17 uncontacted tribes are left in the Brazilian Amazon. I believe the number they gave was they thought there was actually a pocket of 1,350 people in a certain part there, and that was one of the biggest uncontacted pockets of humanity left on the globe. And in fact, the article was a bit ironic because it's about an explorer whose stated goal is to keep these people uncontacted. And yet, as you read the article and look at the pictures, he actually goes into their village. They all run away and scatter, and then they try on their clothing and they mess around with their stuff. It's really quite a strange article that someone who wants to keep these people uncontacted is doing that by, in a way, contacting them. But in any event, it is now possible to have identified everyone on the planet, and in just a few short years, we will have done so. There will be no more people on the planet that have been uncontacted by modern technological society. So that's the first piece, everyone on the planet. The second piece here, small and great. Now let's talk about identifying everyone on the planet and linking them up with our technological society. Here in the United States, we all have telephones, cell phones, televisions, cable TV, laptops, computers. We're hooked into the modern digital world. But there are many parts of the planet that are not hooked up to that modern digital world. They don't have the wiring, they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the method of participating in a modern system of commerce where you would scan your credit card or your loyalty card and use a number to make a purchase. Well, that's changed. There are companies out there. This particular company is called Gilat. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. This picture here is of a hut in the middle of Africa with a satellite dish out in front of it. And Gilat is the company that says Gilat Satellite Networks has been empowering Africa. The principle is simple. Wherever there is a patch of open sky, an exhaustless commodity in Africa, there is a clear pathway for seamless, state-of-the-art telephony and internet connectivity. This is to meet the communications challenge of Africa, where thousands of rural communities lack terrestrial infrastructure or use unreliable, overloaded, or outdated landlines. So not only do you need to identify everyone down to the last tribe in the Amazon in order for this prophecy to become a reality, but you need to be able to get those people linked into a numbering system whereby purchases can be recorded with numbers. That's now become a reality. You can now go to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro or the top of Mount Fuji. You can now go into the deepest jungles of Africa or the Amazon. And you can, if you can find a clear patch of sky, you can hook up a satellite system to link those individuals, those indigenous people, into the computerized buying and selling network. Here's two other companies doing the same thing. A company called Infosat. Their news release said Infosat and Presidia team up to bring point-of-sale capabilities to remote businesses. So what's driving these satellites to go to these remote locations is the idea of being able to buy and sell in those remote locations using digital currency as opposed to local currency. Inmarsat is one other company. Inmarsat satellites provide coverage to 98% of the planet with access to international dial-up, telephone, fax, and data networks. And by the way, when you go, in fact, just last year, I was in an apple orchard, a heritage heirloom apple orchard, where they have apples back from the time of Thomas Jefferson. And it's an incredible place, and it's very much in the middle of nowhere in New Hampshire. But if you go into their little gift shop, the little sort of rustic with the sawdust on the floor, the building that's probably 100 years old, there on the worn wooden counter is a brand new, gleaming, state-of-the-art credit card swipe machine. The same is probably true of the huts in Africa at this point. Rich and poor. Rich nations have access to this technology, the numbered system technology of participating in digital commerce. But what about poor countries? This is also a Gilat image where they've actually taken a telephone, which is the basis of the credit card swipe unit, and they've hooked it up again outside of a hut in Africa. So the technology is now spread across the globe to the point where it is now technically feasible to identify everyone and to link everyone using satellite technology. Now, it's not just the satellite technology, but it's also the internet and the connectivity that the internet provides. The internet is nothing more than a way of transmitting digital or numerical information over distances and linking it up and putting things in databases that can travel at high speeds back and forth. You hook that up with a satellite, and you've got a web as a good image. You've got a web circling the Earth, a network around the globe. whereby all of this information can move around. Without that, it would not be possible, at least not through any way I can envision, to create a system where everyone had to have a number to buy or sell. Free and bond. One of the things that we will be talking about in this hour is a technology called radio frequency identification, which is a way of using radio waves to transmit information about individuals, products, items, money, any physical item on the planet, and transmit that at a distance to where it can be picked up and read. These particular images come from a company called TSI, which provides services, among other things, to correctional institutions or prisons. And one of the things that they have created are monitoring devices that actually transmit digital information about individuals, about where they go and what they do. And we'll be talking a little bit more about this. I want you to keep this image in your mind about free and bond, or free and slave, bond being another word for slave or imprisoned. All right. So the first part was he forced everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark on his right hand. Now, this has been interpreted through this book and countless others in a whole variety of different ways. Everything from it may be a symbolic mark or a spiritual mark to it may be an actual brand. I know when the barcodes came out in the 1970s, a lot of people said, well, maybe it'll actually be a barcode. That would be one way of numbering human beings. The mark has really been a big question mark of what the mark on someone's right hand might be. I'm going to be providing a couple hypotheses for what that might be. But let me first say that before you get to someone's right hand, you might want to get to their wrist. And there are payment technologies out there today that enable buying and selling through something on your wrist. Okay. Have you heard of the mobile speed pass? The mobile speed pass is a handheld device, goes on your keychain. It transmits using radio waves a number associated with you through the air, which is picked up by the either the cash register in the mobile convenience store or by the gas pump. And by pushing that little button, you can transmit the information and you can make your payment without ever taking out your wallet, your credit card, or your cash. Well, Mobile has teamed up with Timex to put this tiny payment device that can beam over a distance in a wristwatch. And in fact, in 1999, when I first started thinking about the mark of the beast and how numerical payment systems, what would have to happen to numerical payment systems using credit cards in order to evolve into the mark of the beast, one of the things that I realized is that you probably, if you told people, gee, we'd like you to implant your credit card in your right hand, people might say no. But what if you told people, gee, you know, that credit card, you could lose it, it could fall out of your wallet, somebody could hold you up. Why don't you strap it on your wrist? It'll be a little more secure. It won't fall off. People can't just come along and grab it. And you know what? People are already accustomed to wearing wristwatches. So what an easy way to make that transition. And in fact, one of the things that I would recommend everyone do as you think about prophecy is create a couple of guideposts for yourself. For me, at the age of 8, my guidepost was if it became necessary to have a number to buy and sell groceries, then I would pull out my Bible and take it seriously. You may want to make one of your own. What seems outlandish? Maybe an implant in your hand? Well, in 1999, when I first started thinking about this technology did not exist. In fact, I'd never heard of the mobile speed pass, and certainly not of a speed pass-enabled Timex watch. But what I did do was I actually printed out a contract. And my idea at the time was I was going to distribute this to everybody, and I would say, in the unlikely event that there ever is a number required to buy or sell, and someone wants to put that in my hand with a mark, I won't take it. And I figured, you know, at that early stage in 1999, nobody, I mean, who wouldn't sign that? I mean, that's never going to happen, right? And if it did happen, it would be a pretty good indication that maybe the stuff in this Bible was true. Well, in looking at that signpost myself, I said, well, what would it take for me to say, oh my gosh, we're really getting there? And I came up with the idea of the watch because I knew that would have to be one of the precursors to putting it in your hand. Would be putting it on a watch. And when I found out about this a couple months ago, really the hair stood up on the back of my neck. I said, okay, this is definitely one of those mileposts that you pass. By the way, not only can you get these Timex watches with Speed Pass, but they've got a whole variety of men's and women's styles. You can go on the Timex website and you can buy one of these for $45, $30, $35. It looks just like a regular watch. Now, it's interesting how easily these things slip into what seems normal. I have to say, the idea of carrying around a watch to make a payment, while it may seem normal in this era of Bluetooth wireless modem connectivity and computers, doesn't seem like that big of a leap. But if you go back 2,000 years ago and put yourself, even 100 years ago, and put yourself in the mind of someone who had never heard of a computer, who didn't even know what lay beyond the next ridge, and you envision explaining to that person how something slapped onto your wrist would be able to communicate a number over a distance which would be used to deduct an account which contained a number, not gold or jewels or goats, but to reduce the level of a number in some computer somewhere, I think that person would look at you and say, I don't get it. In the same way that these authors said, I don't get it. I don't understand. Right? But to us now, in fact, it's so obvious that it's almost not even a big deal. Well, of course, you just, transmit the radio wave, make your payment. What's the big deal? So as we talk about this, I want you to try, if you can, to put yourself back in a pre-technological era. There are no telephones. There's no way to travel. There are no airplanes. We don't know that the Earth is round. We don't know a lot of things. So at that point, the idea of even identifying everyone on the planet, much less using a wristwatch to transmit numerical data to purchase, is just nuts. All right. Next, so none could buy or sell unless he had the mark. Well, let's look a little bit at what's happening today about buying and selling. I don't know the last time you were in FedEx and tried to pay with cash, but FedEx actually won't take cash. They only take credit cards. The last time I went to pick up my car from the dealer after it had been repaired, I brought cash because I make all my purchases in cash. And they would not release my car because the woman couldn't make change. And in fact, even when I went and I got her exact change and I came back, she said, it's after 5 p.m. I can't take it. I have nowhere to put it. You have to use a credit card. So it's becoming to the point now where you almost, even now, and I'm not saying a mark, but there are occasions now where without a number, you cannot buy or sell. The number being your credit card. There are places where you can go, and they won't let you do it. Try renting a car without a credit card. Right? Try checking into a hotel without a credit card. Even though our cash says legal tender for all debts public and private, and I'm awaiting a legal challenge on that to come from some quarter, and hopefully someone will challenge that and say, well, wait a minute, I incurred a debt at my car dealership. Shouldn't I have been able to pay off that debt with cash? And maybe someday somebody's going to stand up and challenge that. One of two things will happen. Either they'll let us pay with cash to pick up our cars from the dealership after 5 p.m., or they'll just strip that right off the cash. They'll just strip those words right off of there and say, well, there's lots of other ways you can do it. In fact, another signpost for me was when the post office, the United States Postal Service, actually had a sign saying, make sure you can pay with a credit card here. And when I got asked, every single time I went to the post office, the postal employee was saying, you can use your Discover or your Visa card, or whatever she was saying. And I said, gosh, you guys are really pounding me over the head with that. And she said, oh, well, we'll lose our job if we don't ask that. That's actually a requirement of our job, is we have to tell you that you can use a credit card here at the Postal Service. So you're starting to see more and more of a push and an emphasis to use credit cards, which are numbers to buy or sell. Let's talk about loyalty cards for a minute. This is an image from The Guardian. It's kind of hard to see, but what it actually says on there is the spy in your wallet, what loyalty cards really mean. Now, loyalty cards may seem like a pretty minor thing to worry about, but let me tell you why loyalty cards are absolutely critical to the creation of a global system of registering purchases to individuals and requiring individuals to present a number to buy or sell. Prior to around 1990, when these cards were introduced, in 1990, a couple things were converging. The internet was becoming fairly widespread. It was beginning to spread into businesses and into stores, point of sale and purchase at cash registers. So those began to get hooked up to the internet so they could do real-time credit card verification, for example. The other thing that was happening, and you may recall prior to that, you could scan your credit card, but they'd scan it on the little sort of separate metallic plastic device that you could actually pick up. It was not wired to anything. They'd sort of scan it. Sometimes they'd maybe ask for ID, but they really had no way in real time, unless they picked up the phone and dialed a special number, which would slow everybody down. They had no way of verifying that that credit card was even valid, potentially. And those of you who are a little bit older might recall that prior to the 1990s. For many years, that's how credit cards worked. There was not a system where credit cards were linked into a thing called the internet, that didn't exist, where they could actually transmit that data in real time to some distant database and remove the money from your account in real time. None of that was possible. Now let me tell you what the loyalty card did to completely revolutionize this. The loyalty card at the local grocery store was the first time that identity was being asked for in order to make a purchase, but the identity was not being asked for as a method of payment. It was being asked for simply because they wanted to know it. And what the loyalty card infrastructure did is create these enormous databases, this huge infrastructure of databases that record people's names and everything they've ever bought at that store, item by item, orange juice brand by orange juice brand, can of Coke by can of Coke. Prior to that, that didn't happen. And in fact, let me back up, because the previous technological innovation leading to all of this was the barcode. Now, what did the barcode do that changed this? And by the way, in the 1970s, when the barcode first came out, a lot of people were saying, mark of the beast, we don't like this, buying and selling, there's some kind of mark on here, there's numbers on here, what is this, right? And in fact, some of you may actually recall that debate. In the 1970s, when the barcode came out, let me tell you what it did, right? The barcode changed physical items, stuff, into numbers. That was the first time humanity has ever converted physical items into numbers. So now, if I scan this pair of shoes at a store, it's not going to say pair of shoes. It's going to get the number off of there and record the number in the database. I suppose I could look it up and write down pair of shoes and put that on your receipt, so it's a little more human-friendly. But basically, the barcode turned things into numbers. The shopper card came along, the loyalty card, and turned people into numbers associated with those things. So it was the first time that we kind of got linked together, people and things, both numerical. Right? Now, what would it take from the system we have in place now, where it is now possible through all these incredible databases to link up individuals with their purchases, to absolutely require that they be linked up with their purchases? Now, the loyalty cards have done a pretty good job of this in the last couple of years, in that the loyalty cards will often bump up the prices unless you have the card, and then when you get the card, you get the reduction in price. And if you don't scan the card, you can pay as much as 50% more for certain grocery items. In fact, we have an example. Albertsons in Texas was caught pricing Velveeta cheese, Kraft Velveeta cheese, had right on the label $3.99, a little Kraft manufacturer's suggested retail price. Well, we caught them putting the everyday low price at $5.99 and saying, scan your Happy Albertsons card, your preferred customer card, and you'll get it for $3.99, a big $2 off. So what they were really doing was charging a $2 surcharge unless you scanned the card, or a 50% surcharge. So either you comply and you go in the database, you present the number, you get recorded, or you pay an extra $2 for, you pay $6 for $4 worth of cheese. That has been an incredibly successful system. At last count, 80% of American households had signed up to participate in those purchase registration programs. And mark my words, that's exactly what they are. They are not savings programs. There have been numerous studies across the country, most recently by CBS Evening News and by the Wall Street Journal, which have shown in every case it's been studied that the prices are higher at the stores with the cards, even when you scan the card, than at the stores without them. And that's because their database is unbelievably sophisticated and very expensive. And it costs a lot of money to store all that data about you and your purchases in the database. And you'd do better just to go to a store that didn't have the card. But now 80% of people have gotten comfortable with the idea of having their every food purchase monitored into a database. So I would say that's maybe the first step to getting people accustomed to the idea of presenting identity in order to buy and sell. And now let me say something else before we get to this tax issue. There are a couple of ways that I've been thinking about in the last few years that you could move from an optional scan the card or pay $6 for $4 worth of cheese, which I guess if you want to pay the extra money, you can still get away without doing it. What would it take to make it mandatory that you must present an identification in order to buy food? Well, it's not like guns, is it? It's not really like fireworks or explosives. It's not really dangerous. I mean, food? How could it be possible that someone could require you to show ID to buy food? Doesn't make sense. Well, let me give you a couple scenarios. Scenario number one, a terrorist gets a hold of some factory and puts cyanide in the baby food. the strained peas now are toxic. The people who've scanned their loyalty card, like dutiful, obedient consumers, have registered their purchase of those strained peas in the database, and they get the phone call from the public health officials, frantic. You bought those peas last week. You've got to throw them away. They're toxic, right? The people who didn't scan their loyalty card, who either shopped at a store that didn't have one or were like me and said, I refuse to use that thing, those folks, unfortunately, would have some pretty tragic accidents, and people would die. And believe me, that would be all over the television, the pictures of the beautiful, 6-month-old baby who ate the strained peas. And at that point, I could see Congress getting involved and saying, well, it's certainly not fair that people who live in, nice neighborhoods with wonderful stores that have these cards get a chance to register their purchases. But these people who live in other neighborhoods or don't have access to those kind of stores, it's not fair that they should be the ones who run the risk of not knowing about a product recall if something gets tainted. In fact, you know what we'll do as Congress? I think we'll just make some appropriations and we'll say we will provide some matching funds to all of those stores who don't have the program, and we'll help you out. And we'll set that up so that everybody who buys the strained peas has an opportunity to register in the database. We won't make it mandatory or anything. I mean, certainly you wouldn't want to force people to do it, but we certainly want to give them that option if they'd like. And then let's say down the road, you let that sink in for 3, 5 years, 10 years. You let people get real used to the idea that good moms scan their purchases with the credit card. Good moms record their purchases because good moms want to know if something's wrong with the food they're feeding Junior. And insurance companies would say, well, gee, if you're one of those moms that scans all your purchases, we'll give you a break on your insurance. We'll give you a couple of different incentives to make you do it. And then down the road, it's going to be, just like today, only 20% of households don't participate in those programs. Down the road, maybe only 20% or even 5% or 2% of people aren't scanning like good little moms scanning their purchases. And at that point, then, Congress just says, you know what, that's just not safe. In fact, if you're not scanning your purchases and recording everything that you're buying, it could be tainted. We're going to consider that you may be a dangerous parent. Maybe we'll take your kids away unless you do it. So there's scenario number 1. Of how you could actually say, you know what, to make a purchase, you've just got to register it because it wouldn't be safe otherwise. Let me give you scenario number 2. There is something out there called the Fair Tax Act of 2003. Many of you may have heard of it. It's an extremely popular proposal. The Fair Tax Act of 2003 would replace the income tax system with a sales tax system. Right? Now, I'm going to tell you right now, it is the worst thing I have ever heard of. Let me tell you why. And I know those of you nodding are probably nodding because you think it's the greatest thing you ever heard of, because it sounds pretty great. Well, first of all, the income tax system as it currently stands is an absolute wreck. We all know it. It is invasive. It pries into every aspect of our life. Even the IRS officials themselves cannot give valid advice about what that tax code says because it's this thick. Nobody can plow their way through it. It is a nightmare. We have a nightmare taxation system in this country that absolutely does not work, and it does need to be reformed. I will be the first to admit it. But let me tell you how you don't want to reform it. You do not want to reform it with a national sales tax. Let me tell you why. Global sales tax. All right. From income tax to global sales tax, question mark. All right. This is a quote here. Dissatisfaction with the current income tax continues to generate interest in broad-based tax reform. In particular, there's considerable interest in moving from our current income tax to a consumption tax. Now, this comes from the think tank, the Cato Institute. And in fact, they devote a policy analysis paper back in 1997 when this was first proposed that actually took a look at what might be the problem with this and addressed what might be some inequalities associated with it. Let me talk about if you switch, it's not putting aside revelations for the moment, just looking at taxation. If you switch away from our current system, which has graduated taxes, people at the lower end of the income scale don't pay any tax, people at the higher end pay a very large proportion of their income in tax. And the idea is that it sort of taxes the rich, kind of a Robin Hood idea, taxes the rich, doesn't tax the poor. If you switch to sales tax, let's say we said everybody's going to pay 25% sales tax from this moment on. Well, that's a problem because the rich only spend a certain small portion of their income every month, let's say 2%, to live. And the rest of it can all sort of go into funds and accounts and other places. So it's not being spent and no taxes are being paid on it. The poor, on the other hand, there are many people who, by the time their 2-week paycheck comes around, they've already spent everything from their previous 2-week paycheck. And they would be paying 25% of all of that. So there's an inequality, an inequity in a global taxation system or a sales taxation system. Now, this is addressed over and over. This is what this policy analysis paper is about. Let me give you the solution. The solution is if I could identify who you were, I could set your specific sales tax rate at the point of sale, right at the cash register. So in fact, if I could identify that you, Susan Peterson over there, are in a lower income bracket, and you should only be paying 5% tax, then by identifying you in real time, looking you up in the database, and selling to you, I can deduct only 5%, and in real time send it straight to the government. On the other hand, if I learn that you over there, Joe McIntyre, you're making $500,000 a year, I can say, well, you need to be taxed at a 60% tax rate when you buy your new Ferrari. I look you up in the database, I identify you, and you get your own unique sales tax rate right at the point of sale in real time. Now, that would solve all of the problems with this universal sales tax plan. It would solve them in real time. It would solve them very efficiently and for good. And we would be rid of this awful and annoying income tax system that we have now. Now, here's the problem. If you don't identify yourself at the point of sale and you don't pay your tax, you will be breaking the law. You will be committing tax fraud. And you'll go to jail. So if we move to this system where I have to say, here's me, I can verify certainly that it's me. I didn't just borrow my friend's ID to say I'm in the 5% tax bracket. But I presented something that's unique to me, that can be identified specifically with me, like a biometric, like a fingerprint, like an iris scan, like a DNA sample. Then you'd know for sure that I really am me, and that I really do qualify for that lower tax rate rather than the higher tax rate. So there's two ways right off the bat that I can think of right now where it would be possible to require identity in order to make a purchase. All right. Now, a couple years back, an official with the Federal Reserve Bank made a proposal, something called the carry tax. And his idea, I believe this was in 1999, was that cash should carry a magnetic strip that, as the cash is issued from an ATM card or from a bank, would actually identify the date. It would keep track of the date that it was issued. And if you held on to it longer than a certain period of time, it would begin deducting in value. So in other words, your dollar might suddenly become worth 99 cents after a couple months, and then 98 cents after a couple months. And when you went to cash it or spend it or deposit it into the bank, you would take maybe let's say you took $300 bills, and you'd held on to them for a year. You'd take them to the bank, and you'd go, here, I want to deposit this. And they go, oh, yeah, that's $260 we'll deposit. And the other $40 we'll give to the federal government as tax. It was actually a proposal. It was met with a lot of unhappy responses in Congress. It was not a popular proposal, but it's a proposal that's been floating around for a while, this idea of tagging cash and keeping track of what it does. All right. And we'll get back to that in a sec, because I want to talk about how cash plays into this whole system of using numbers to buy and sell, because cash would seem to be an exception to that. All right. There is, and you can't see it on this image, and I wish you could, because do you see? This is from NTT, which is a Japanese company. They've developed an identification system using DNA, similar to what I was talking about, where you would actually identify the individual and make sure they were the right person, claiming to be the right person, fully identified for a purchase. Well, on their card here, they actually have this little thing in the bottom right. Underneath it, it says DNA certification mark. And there would actually be an encoded mark on there representing an individual's DNA. In fact, a couple months ago in England, one of the original discoverers of DNA was saying, I think it would be a good idea to DNA everybody at birth and put that information on a card, maybe an identity card similar to what they're looking into in England, so you'd have your unique identifying number associated with you on your card. And this actually comes from China, this quote here. Citizens will use the card. This is a national ID card with a smart chip in it. Citizens will use the card to identify themselves in many settings, including when they make bank deposits, check into hotels and at airports, and when they trade stocks. Now, this is communist China, but you know what? This is sounding a lot like the United States at the moment. Think about the last time you checked into a hotel. Did they ask for your ID? Think about the last time you got on an airplane. They certainly asked for your ID then. And in fact, there was just a story saying that the bus system, the Greyhound bus system, is going to start requiring ID for you to get on a bus. Now, why do they need to know that? I ask myself that. What possible crime could I commit by just getting on a bus? Now, there is a summit coming up called the Future of Money Summit. It's in a couple of months. And there's some fascinating futuristic scenarios of what's going to happen to money. I put this up here because, first of all, I think the symbol's a little bit creepy. It's the pyramid. Oftentimes we see that pyramid with the all-seeing eye. That's the pyramid on the back of our dollar bills. That's the pyramid that was associated with the Total Information Awareness Program, which was a Department of Defense initiative to know everything in every database about every American, every purchase they made, every place they went, every telephone call they made, and bank deposit they made, had the all-seeing eye above the pyramid. I put this up here not because it's particularly unique, but because there are so many summits talking about the future of money. And what they all agree on is that cash is going away and all purchases very shortly will become digital. That everything we do is going to switch over to credit cards. So now imagine cash is gone and we switch to credit cards. What would that mean? And in fact, think about all the cards in your wallet. 5, 10, 20, 30. It's a pain to have to sift through all those cards. In fact, I call it looking for the 3 of spades. When somebody says, do you have your whatever card, your Safeway card, your Kroger card, and you're kind of going through, pulling it out, right? At some point, all of those cards are going to get so annoying that people are going to consolidate them into one smart card, which contains all of it. In fact, a couple years ago, there was something called the Driver's License Modernization Act. And what it would have done would be to take our driver's licenses and put a smart computer chip in them and load all of that information on them. So then at the supermarket, instead of presenting your loyalty card, you'd be presenting your ID card, making it really easy to verify your identity. And the same with every other place you had a card, your health club, your phone card, etc. So the future of money, the way it is being described out there is it will be smart chips. All of the information will be contained on one smart chip or one smart key fob, and you'll carry that around, and everything about you, including even your medical history, would be contained on there. Right? Visa is already doing this. September 2002, Visa International is making a push with a new smart card payment system that would allow hands-free transactions. Same idea. You've got your credit card. You just wave it. And the reader from a distance reads the radio frequency chip inside of it, identifies you, and makes the purchase without you having to really do much of anything. Right? And in fact, this Bank One Visa card here is equipped with a radio frequency device that can actually be read at a distance, meaning that in the store of the future, it would be possible for you to simply put all of your items in a basket, get up to the checkout, put it on a little conveyor that would just kind of run through. You literally pick up the basket, let it run through. It would survey every item in there using tiny radio frequency chips embedded in the items. And then it would read your credit card information right through your wallet. Of course, at that point, you would only have one such device in your wallet, so it wouldn't be competing of 10 different credit cards. You'd have your one. You determine which one you were going to register with the store. It would read through there, and you just walk right out. In fact, a lot of people have told me about an ad a couple years ago where the guy's like stuffing things into his shirt, and he's kind of sneaking, and he sneaks out to the door to leave the store, and they go, sir, you forgot your receipt. You guys seen that ad? And the idea is this is how we will shop in the future. We won't have to fuddle around with cash or money. We can just walk out of the door. And something about us, something associated with us, would be sending enough information to make the purchase. Right? This device here is a radio frequency-enabled loyalty card from a grocery store. It is the next generation loyalty card. And in fact, the gentleman who gave it to me was boasting that having 2 antennas on there coming out of that central chip would mean that your identity could be read at a distance using this device of up to 20 feet away the minute you walked through the door of the store. And in fact, there are plans underway to use these loyalty cards to identify and discriminate against people based on their value to the store. And in England, there are a couple of chains that actually employ bouncers and have been talking about using information about you contained on this chip that would be beamed out at a distance in order to decide whether they would even serve you, and in some cases even let you in the door. And I had a dream about 6 months ago that was really disturbing. I dreamt that I was looking at the entrance to a store, and there were people huddled outside of the store, unable to get into the store, and they were begging people going in to please buy items for them. So using this technology and using the store's current idea of discriminating against valuable and not valuable customers, maybe even offering them different prices, it would be possible in this world to say, well, wait a minute, the last 10 times you came in the store, you only bought items on sale, you cost us more than you made us, and you know what? The door's not going to open for you when you get to the door. We'll just read you, identify you, just like we like to do on the way out when you pay. We'll do it on the way in, and you know what? That door just won't open. Or when you get up to the checkout counter, we'll actually identify you there, and we'll say, sorry, you can't buy this on sale. You've bought too many sales. You've passed your quota for the month. So it is possible to use these devices to identify people and to treat them differently and discriminate against them. And this is being planned already. I've read the documentation. Right. Now, we were talking about cash. And if cash becomes embedded with tiny radio frequency devices, let me explain how these devices work. It's a tiny silicon chip, a tiny computer chip that contains a unique identifying number. It can be read at a distance by beaming electromagnetic energy at it. It stimulates the chip hooked up to an antenna. The antenna magnifies the radio signal, sends back the number to the reader device, and enables it to be identified at a distance. If you put these into cash, what it means is that every single banknote coming out of the Federal Reserve would have its own unique number. Now, currently they have unique serial numbers, but there's no way really to read them, and certainly not to read them at a distance. If you do this with cash, and you put unique identifying numbers, as the cash comes out of the ATM machine, or as the teller hands it to you at the bank, or as the Walmart teller gives it back, or cashier gives it back to you as change, that can actually be registered to you in the database, meaning that if you took that money, now let's say we move to the point where we've got this global sales tax, and let's say you went to, a yard sale, and you wanted to buy somebody's sailboat, and you gave them $300 bills for their sailboat, and you didn't pay the tax. Because remember, if we move to a global sales tax system, not paying tax on something would be a huge crime. And now it's kind of a minor crime, but in the future it's going to be a massive crime because it's going to be the government's only source of income. So now you buy somebody's sailboat, you give them $300, and you don't register that cash, and you don't pay the sales tax on it. Now he takes those $300 and he tries to do something with them at Walmart. Walmart could say, well, wait a minute, this wasn't registered to you. This wasn't an official transaction. You're under arrest. Where'd you get this money? We're confiscating it. This is contraband. So if cash becomes identifiable and linked with individuals, the anonymity of purchases could go away, and our ability to make transactions that the government doesn't know about would go away as well. Even if you just gave 20 bucks to your roommate, it's possible that that could come under suspicion. And the excuse given for this, the explanation given for this, is to stop counterfeiters and to track money launderers and drug transactions because of the big underground economy where cash is changing hands and it's not being recorded in the database. And right now, every transaction, the push is to record all transactions in a database. So there's a real government uneasiness with the idea of any money changing hands. Now this is, bear in mind, this is before we even have national sales tax. If it's that way now, imagine what it's going to be if we get national sales tax. It's going to be the new drug war, where every single thing you do is going to be scrutinized. Now let's talk about the Verichip implant. All right. The Verichip implant is a tiny RFID device containing a unique individual number that has been proposed as a way of verifying who individuals are and information about them. The Verichip currently is produced by a company called Applied Digital Solutions. They also make something called the Digital Angel. The Verichip implant is normally inserted into this part of a person's arm. Not many people have taken it yet. It's not a very popular technology because it gives people the creeps. Right? But the idea of this technology is once you have it in there, you can be identified if you had a coma or ran into trouble. Someone could scan across that thing, pick up your number, look you up in a database, and know who you are. Well, now imagine for a minute that we have a system now where they want to identify who you are. You've got all of your stuff in a key fob or a credit card, in a smart card, or in your driver's license. If you lose that thing, you're in trouble. You then strap it on your wrist, so we move to the next stage. Now we've got them on people's wrists. If someone comes along and steals your wristwatch, then you're really in trouble because it's not just stealing your wristwatch, it's stealing your entire identity, your medical history, and everything about you. So the next step, the next logical step to prevent crime and identity theft would be to embed it directly in your body. They can't steal your arm, they can't steal your hand. Not only that, but imagine how simple it would be when you're in the store and you want to make a payment and you just walk up to the reader device, press your hand to it, and walk out of the door. With one of these devices containing the same information that right now you present whenever you scan a credit card, it would be very simple. So the idea, and I can't emphasize enough how much I think credit cards are really a problem. Because when you pay with a credit card, you are essentially paying with a number, and that's it. It goes out into the ether. Nothing but numbers are changing hands across the globe every time you pay with a credit card. Put that number in a chip, put it in a mark in your hand, and you're all set. Right? Now, I'm going to come back to this in just a second. Okay. All right. Now, the tiny chips, the radio frequency identification chips that are going to make a lot of this possible, the identifying people from a distance, the using a device to make a payment, the transmitting of information using radio waves without actually having to pull anything out or hand anything to anybody, the thing that would work if you had your hand pressed up against a reader device, that is a tiny device that is actually the size of a speck of dust or a piece of glitter. What you're looking at here are radio frequency identification chips. They're tiny chips that contain unique identifying numbers. Those tiny chips, if hooked up to an antenna, are capable of beaming out information or actually having a radio wave beamed at them and sending back information of up to 20 or 30 feet away. If they're hooked up to a battery, they can actually do that all the way up to a satellite. That's unlikely because the battery pack at this point would be quite large in order to do that. But this is the device that is inside of this VeriChip that we were just looking at. Inside of here. Now, this is the tiny piece of glass that gets embedded in people's upper arms if they sign up with this Applied Digital Solutions technology. Inside of it is a tiny chip containing a unique identifying number for each human being. It's wrapped around with a little metallic coil, and you can't really see it there, but can you see sort of the copper wire that goes around and around? Now, this thing is actually quite small, as you can see here, small enough as to be almost undetectable in your body. And I want you to think about that coil for just a minute, because I'm going to be talking about it in relation to Revelations. Okay. This image here is from the VeriChip. You can see at the bottom it says Get Chipped. Their big promotional scheme is to use this for security purposes. In the financial arena, okay, now again, we're talking buying and selling. VeriChip has enormous potential as a personal verification technology. Now remember what I said earlier. You'd have to verify who you were in order to make sure you're being charged the right tax rate or in order to make sure you're putting the right purchase of strained peas into the database. This would be a technology that would make that possible. It's one of the ways they're promoting it, and it's one of their great ideas for it. VeriChip accomplishes this without batteries or any internal source of power. It lies dormant under your skin until energized by a proprietary VeriChip reader. Now, this is a little bit misleading. This idea that it doesn't contain batteries would lead you to think that there's no energy coming out of it. What happens, though, is in order to read this, you have to be bombarded with energy from outside. So the energy goes actually into your body. Electromagnetic energy from a reader goes into your body, hits this device, it activates inside of you and sends back its number. We do not know the long-term health effects of having these devices in human bodies and having them pick up and amplify radio waves and send them back. We have no idea what that would do over the long haul. Now, this is a slide from an industry consortium called the Auto ID Center that wants to promote the use of these tiny tracking devices, the RFID tags, for a variety of different reasons. Perhaps the most disturbing of them, in addition to counting humans, would be to count and number every item on the planet and use it to replace the barcode. So physical items could actually be identified and numbered and linked from a distance and tracked. Now, one of the things on this slide that they talk about is it would take 23 bits, that's the numerical information it would have to contain in that tiny speck of dust-sized chip to number every automobile on the planet. It would take 29 bits, or zeros and ones, a string of 29 zeros and ones to number all the computers. And here's the creepy part. It would only take 33 zeros and ones to give a unique identifying number to every human being on the planet. So 001, 011, do that 33 times, and you've got a unique number for everyone. Now, the disturbing part here is that this industry consortium, which consists of some of the biggest global companies in the world, including Procter & Gamble, including Johnson & Johnson, Kimberly-Clark, International Paper, big companies, Coca-Cola, these guys should be thinking about products, and yet on here they're naming human beings. So this technology, with all of this backing, by the way, the Department of Defense and the U.S. Postal Service are also backers of this technology. The fact that they're putting human beings on their slides and their internal documents as a way to utilize this technology is a little bit worrisome. And definitely, by putting one of these numbers into one of these VeriChips and implanting it into a human being, you could verify them. You could have a number associated with them. You could link that number up to a database, and you could require them to present that in order to buy or sell for the reasons that we talked about. The company producing these chips is a company called Alien Technology, and you can't really see it very well, but it's got, I think, one of the creepiest logos I've ever seen. It's black, it's got red on a black background. It has what looks like almost 3 claw marks sort of screeching across the screen. And in fact, most of the imagery associated with this technology is quite dark. At a conference I attended about 2 months ago, there was a gentleman from Philip Morris talking about this technology. He was talking to a bunch of global executives from global companies who deal with moving products around. And he was telling them, you know, when this comes out, when we have radio devices and everything, when we're tracking everything all over the planet, you're going to need to really change the way you run your warehouse in your back room. And do you know what he said? And he meant this in terms of you're going to have to totally change the way you do business and revolutionize your thinking about moving products. But his statement was, this technology will destroy our way of life. The purpose of this technology is to destroy our way of life. Now, it's interesting because in his saying that, the whole room went silent. By the way, these are people who love the idea of tracking things as they move around. But even then, the room went silent because that was a pretty heavy statement. And I don't think he meant that it's going to absolutely destroy our way of life as we live day to day. But I also don't think he realized the symbolic importance of what he had said. Because if we do actually number every human being, and if we do number every physical item, and if we can keep track of all of that through databases and through computer systems, it will actually destroy our way of life. There will be no more freedom. There will be no more privacy or no more ability to walk around and even talk to other people freely, because your every move will be monitored and tracked. Right, there's the chips. And these devices, as I said, this industry consortium, they've already begun appearing, these radio frequency devices, in consumer products. What you're seeing here is a package of Gillette razor blades that's been equipped with one of these unique numbers, making it trackable from a distance. The purpose here was shoplifting prevention, but ultimately they want to put one of these on every physical item that we buy, meaning that not only would you be identifying yourself with your chip as you made your purchase, but all of the things you bought would also be identified with you, linked in a database. And in essence, it would make it difficult in a world where, let's say, there is the mark of the beast, and you've got a brother-in-law who is maybe willing to take the mark of the beast and give you the stuff that he buys so you can survive. In a world like that, if he bought a shirt, paid for it with his mark, and then handed it to you, that shirt could be tracked at a distance. It could be identified as you walk through a doorway, and they could say, hey, wait a minute, you're not Joe Schmo. You don't have the chip in your, this. In fact, now we've identified you as being the guy who's in trouble for not taking the chip, and now we're going to scan everything you're wearing, and we'll know where you got it, and we'll know who your accomplices were who helped you obtain these items. Now, one of the things that's going to have to happen globally, in addition to identifying everyone, linking everyone with the satellites and the database and the number of payment systems, getting everybody using credit cards away from cash and getting everyone to identify themselves, is have it be universal and standardized. And there is a massive push right now in industry and in retail to do that. It's called oneness. And in fact, this is from the Retail Systems 2003 in Chicago, creating oneness among systems, supply chain, and business. And the idea is that everything will be standardized. Now, there are Walmarts all over the world. Walmart is now the biggest retailer on the globe. Walmart has the capacity to put many other businesses out of business. And in fact, there was a statement a couple years ago in England that England was too small for 3 grocery chains. So the idea is to put, and in fact, we've seen a huge loss. People talk about loss of biodiversity. I talk about loss of retail diversity. If you're over 30, think back to how many grocery stores there were when you were a kid, or how many department stores, or how many anything stores. And now think of how many there are today. I'm boycotting Walmart and Target because of their involvement with this RFID technology. There is nowhere where I can go to buy basic things. In fact, I needed dish towels the other day. And I had to really rack my brain to think, other than Walmart and Target in my town, where can I go to buy dish towels? What a simple thing, right? Now, imagine that Walmart and Target start doing this. Imagine that Walmart and Target put everybody out of business, and there's only Walmart and Target. Where are you going to shop? If they start putting incredible demands on you, if they start asking you to present who knows what. So even if the system remains open and there's no overt imposition, there's no overt rule that says you must, you're not going to have much choice. I mean, I pretty much must shop at Walmart or Target if I want dish towels. I found a way around it, but it was tough. So this oneness idea, imagine that Walmart and Target are the only stores left on the globe, and the entire planet is now Walmart and Target. Walmart could make one imposition, and millions, hundreds of millions, billions of people could be affected by one rule that Walmart made. So if Walmart made the rule, you must identify yourself to buy here. Guess what? Most of the world's going to have to identify themselves to make a purchase. Walmart has that kind of power. And let me tell you something Walmart just did in case you doubt that. In the 1970s, Walmart single-handedly caused the rest of the country to adopt the barcode. Almost single-handedly. There was a time where the barcode was out there, but there was a lot of resistance on the part of consumers. Mark of the beast, concern, worry, impersonalization, etc. People didn't want to do it. Walmart made a mandate. Now, in the 70s, you think Walmart wasn't even that big, right? Well, Walmart made a mandate late 70s, early 80s, that said, if you are going to sell products through our store, you got to put a barcode on them or we won't sell them. And believe me, they snapped into line like that. Now, that was before Walmart was the world's biggest retailer. Walmart right now is massive. And in fact, you know what Walmart just made an announcement of 2 months ago? They made an announcement that their 100 top suppliers must become compliant with this radio frequency identification technology. Their top 100 suppliers must put these tiny chips at least onto the cases and the pallets in the warehouse. The pallet is the thing that the forklift lifts up, that wooden thing with all the products on it. They said you got to get compliant with that. You got to learn how to use that, right? You got to put that into your factory or you will not be able to sell your products at Walmart. Now, Walmart's the 800-pound gorilla. They tell suppliers to do something. Suppliers jump. And in fact, the whole industry right now is investing enormous amounts of money to try to comply with that. And by the following year, they want that by the end of 2004. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that individual products in Walmart stores are going to have those on them, but it's coming. It's coming real soon. So Walmart has an extraordinary amount of power. Right? So this oneness thing is real. Pressure to comply. Stores, retailers, and all of the people participating in buying and selling things across the world are all being pressured to get on board with the same standardized systems. The same standardized systems that involve the internet, digital payment technologies, Visa card, etc. If they come out with a system that says everybody's got to present a mark, everything will be in place to make that possible, in fact, pretty quickly because of all this standardization. This is a book called Adapt or Die, and it was handed out to CEOs from around the world who came to Boston last month to attend something called a CEO Forum for RFID adoption. RFID being these tiny chips they want to put in everything and possibly everybody. And this was the book they handed out to those CEOs. They came to learn about it, but what they were told was, listen, you're going to be dinosaurs unless you adopt it, and you better adopt it now. And they're scrambling to do it. Huge amounts of money are going into this. Now let's come back to what brought us down this whole path of talking about the technologies in place today, and this is Revelations. Let's look at this. He also forced everyone, okay? We know we can identify everyone now. Small and great, rich and poor, free and slave. Let's go back to that free and slave or free and bond slide that we saw earlier where we had the prison guard and the prisoner. They're wearing wristwatches. The wristwatches they're wearing are very similar to that Timex payment wristwatch. They're very similar to the mark of the beast. Or, excuse me. Let me take that back. I slip of the tongue. They're very similar to the Verichip implant that would be beaming out individual information and be capable of being tracked through that. That's exactly what those are. They're tracking devices. They have radio frequency devices in them. They can be read at a distance. And they keep track of both the jailer and the jailed equally. Right? So, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead. You know what? It doesn't make sense for me to have a Verichip implanted here because if I go to pay, I'm going to have to, I'm going to have to be doing that. Where would be the logical place to put it? What's the easiest thing I could slap onto there to make a payment? My hand. So that would be the obvious place. Maybe here, maybe you kind of, if it's like that, maybe I do that. We don't know, top, bottom of the hand. But somewhere on the hand would be the easiest thing to slip into a payment system. Let's say I have no hands, and I think someone in the audience asked that question before we got started. So I have no hands. The payment system's over there. What am I going to do? My knee? No. My elbow? No, I don't have it. My shoulder? No, my head. It's the easiest, most flexible part of my body if I don't have hands. So a forehead would definitely fit the bill in that case. All right, so receive a mark in his right hand or on his forehead so that none could buy or sell unless he had the mark. We can see how that's possible. Which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. Now, let me move on to the next slide. And we'll address that. Here is wisdom. Let he who has understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of man or the number of a man, depending on how you want to interpret it. And his number is 603 score and 6. All right. Let's look back. The name of the beast or the number of his name has been the subject of countless thousands of pages of machinations and supposition and codes and changing Hebrew letters and Greek letters and Roman letters and converting stuff, and it's all been really confusing and crazy. Let me tell you what I believe, and I certainly don't have any, direct access to the truth here. Just something I've thought about a lot. It is my feeling that this mark of the beast required to buy or sell is going to be so obvious. It's going to be like the nose on the end of your face. You're not going to miss it. When that mark of the beast comes, you're going to know it's the mark of the beast. They're going to say, hold out your right hand. We want to put a mark in there so you can make payment, so you can buy and sell. It's not going to be some tricky thing you're not going to see coming. It is also my sense based on this book and others like it, of how many contortions they had to go through to try to come up with what this mark might be, when this generation, when it's actually maybe on the brink of happening, it's so obvious to us. Of course, there's a Verichip, of course. No question. That when it comes time when that 666 is out there, whoever is alive at that time when that comes, it's going to be just as obvious to them what that's going to mean. And I personally, and you can do whatever you want, code-wise or number-wise, or believe whatever theory you want out there, but I personally believe that we probably don't have to engage in a whole lot of speculation about that at this point in time, because when the time comes, we'll know what that means. That's my guess. Now, the name of the beast, or the number of his name, now that is something I can speak to. Think about how you would represent your name in a computer. When I type in Catherine Albrecht in my Microsoft Word program and I hit save and I've got my name in there, my name is recorded as a series of numbers because that's how computers record information. It's not in there as a word. It's in there as a series of numbers. So it's possible the name of the beast or the number of his name, well, gosh, if you computerized it and encoded it in something, it would be a number. And so this might be a very literal way of explaining that. A name or the number of the name, meaning the same thing in a computer. Now, the last piece here, let him who has understanding count the number of the beast. That's tough to do right now. I don't know what that is. But it does tell us it is the number of man or the number of a man. Now, if it's the number of a man, I don't know who that man is at this time, and I don't know what his number would be. But if it's the number of man, there is no number, more specifically you. There is no identifier, more specifically you, than your DNA. And if you think back to that Japanese card that I showed you that had the DNA mark on it, that would be probably the best definition I can think of the number of man or the number of an individual man. Because there's nothing else about you that would be unchanging. And even iris scanning, illness can change the shape of your iris. Even fingerprints, if you get burned or get in an accident. In fact, people who do a lot of, I think masons who lay bricks can actually rub their fingerprints off. Facial recognition doesn't work because as you age and change, your facial structure will actually change. So the only really foolproof way of identifying you would be through DNA. And there are technologies out there. In fact, I just heard this week that they are now able to extract DNA from fingerprints, the actual little tiny bit of oil you leave when you touch something. They can actually pull that out and extract your DNA from it. The technology of identifying people through DNA is becoming more and more sophisticated, and it will be possible at some point to identify you through your DNA in real time. Real time meaning take a little sample and figure out immediately who you are. Right? So when I read this, I don't know if it's the number of a man, and we'll all know when he comes, and his number will be, maybe he'll have a big crown that says 666, I don't know. But it's possible to think about it this way also, that the number of a man or the number of an individual could be their DNA encoded in the Verichip to correspond to them. Why would you want to do that instead of just assigning one of those 33-bit numbers randomly selected by the Auto ID Center or whoever? The reason you'd want to do that is because if I kidnapped one of you and dug out your little chip, I could stick it in my hand, and then I could be you. I could go out making purchases, putting my hand around, right? Using up your bank account. What would prevent that? What would prevent that would be somehow having that chip not work unless it verifies that the DNA of the person in who it's been inserted matches the DNA of the chip. And then you would need the number of the man or the number of the person who had it in their hand. And there are ways to do that. In fact, I've got an interesting military document that talks about biological identifiers and military applications way far out there, projecting what they'll be able to do in like 2025. And that's one of the things they talk about, having the capability of doing real-time identifying DNA and making sure things match the right person. Now, the last part, his number is 603 score and 6. I just want to clarify a misconception out there. Again, I do not know what this number means. I don't claim to. But what I do know that it's not is it's not the number 6, meaning 6. The number 6 and the number 6. The original Greek in which this is written makes it very clear, using different characters because their numbering system is different from our numbering system, that is 660 and 6. And I clarify that because there's been a lot of people who say, well, the barcode has like six, I don't know if it's barcodes or what, but I've heard people conjecturing there's 6 digits here, and then there's 6 digits here, and then there's 6 digits there. That looks like 666, so that might be the mark of the beast. And I would only caution you, as you're thinking about that, you got to be thinking 660 and 6, not 3 individual digits of 6. All right, now let's talk about what my grandmother told me way back in that kitchen many years ago about taking the mark of the beast, when I made a promise that I would tell my grandkids and their grandkids so my descendants someday wouldn't do it. Why not? Why not? They'd starve. They couldn't eat. In fact, they'll be beheaded, right? What happens to people who don't take the mark of the beast in this world isn't so good. But let's talk about what happens to people who do take the mark of the beast in this world. Let's fast forward a little bit through Revelation to the point where God comes down and begins passing judgment on the earth. Revelation 16:1, and I heard a great voice out of the temple saying to the 7 angels, go your ways and pour out the vials of the wrath of God upon the earth. 16:2, and the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome, that means stinky, smelly, disgusting, a noisome and grievous sore upon those who had the mark of the beast and upon them which worshipped his image. So on the physical plane right here on earth, the people who take that thing are going to have a really bad experience. Now, what could that bad experience be? Well, it could be something solely spiritual where God afflicts those people with a sore. Entirely possible. What could it be in the sort of technologically feasible realm right here and now? Well, think back to that little device. In fact, let me see if I can scan us back up here and we'll take a look at this thing again. There we go. Okay. Imagine this device in someone's hand. The way this device works is it picks up teeny bits of electromagnetic energy beamed at it from a distance from a reader, and it amplifies them using that coiled antenna. Amplifies, makes bigger, expands. So it can feed that chip so the chip can feed back its information across a distance. Let's say that instead of sending it a normal amount of electromagnetic energy, you send it a big amount of electromagnetic. In fact, let's imagine that you burst a massive amount of electromagnetic energy at that device. What's going to happen? Well, if you take one of these RFID devices and you put it in your microwave, which is the equivalent of overloading it, it will burst into flames. I've done it. You put this in somebody's hand, embedded in their flesh, and you do that to it, first of all, that piece of metal copper will get that copper wire on there will get incredibly hot, because that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to pick up and amplify that energy. It would get so hot, in fact, that it would probably burst. And then you would have those shards of glass and burst molten metal inside of your hand. Not only that, but that electromagnetic energy that it would now be beaming out would be going right through your flesh. Boy, we're talking pain that would drop you to the ground clutching your hand as it was destroyed. Right? So if something like an electromagnetic pulse weapon, an EMP weapon, or let's say a megawatt of electromagnetic energy were beamed at one of these devices, or at a room full of people with these devices, or at a country full of people with these devices in them, they would all fall to the ground and probably have noisome and grievous sores in their hands or their foreheads as a result. So now that's on the physical realm, that's on the plane here. And again, I don't know what that means. That's just one possibility. If we're all embedded with these things, that would not look good if that energy came along. All right, now let me tell you the spiritual thing that will happen to people who take the mark of the beast. And I think this is far more worrisome. Revelations 14, verses 9 through 11. If any man worship the beast and his image and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured without mixture into the cup of his indignation, and he shall be tortured with fire and brimstone. God makes it very clear in the Bible that you are not to take the mark of the beast. In fact, that is probably the ultimate no-no. I think we can be forgiven for a lot of other things, and we have the grace of Jesus to allow that to happen. But I don't see any grace of Jesus rescuing these people in here. This passage is absolutely unmistakable. Now, the good news. If you don't take the mark of the beast, and if you're lucky enough to be beheaded for not taking the mark of the beast, if you're lucky enough to actually be killed because you don't take the mark of the beast, you get this great reward. Let's look at what the reward is. Chapter 20, verse 4. And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given to them. And I saw the souls of them that had been beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God. And I guess I left out my next passage. Let's see, is it on the next? There we go. And which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, nor had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. Everybody else has to wait to the end of the 1,000 years. But these guys, they get it in real time. So when this mark comes, Christians are going to have a tough row to hoe here. Because you're going to have to make a decision not to participate in something which everybody around you is going to be doing, which the whole world is going to be doing, and without which you're going to have a hard time. You're not going to be able to receive medical care. You're not going to be able to get an apartment or a house. You're not going to be able to buy food. It's rough. Even now, I consider myself to be kind of a canary in the coal mine in a way. They used to put canaries down in the coal mine because they would die before the miners if the air wasn't any good. Okay? Well, I'm kind of fading here a little bit because I do not use credit cards. And I pay everything with cash. And I do it as a way to kind of keep my finger to the pulse of what's happening with the retail world of buying and selling and seeing how much longer I'm going to be able to do that. And there's times when I can't. I also don't show ID. So when I check into hotels, I have to deal with song and dance. I had a prescription filled this week. And I had a big, long conversation about it. They said, you've got to be in the system. So they put it, we got to put you in our system. I said, I don't want to be in your system. I have a valid prescription and I'm a valid patient. And I wouldn't have this in my hand if it wasn't me. So things like that, we Christians need to be the canaries in the coal mine. Because if we can't handle a couple of setbacks now, what are we going to do when this comes? I mean, if we can't handle the inconvenience of paying cash for our groceries, you think we're going to handle the inconvenience of not being able to do anything? So this is the time, I think, for Christians to really strengthen our faith and really strengthen our working in the world and be apart from the world. Because the world is heading straight down this road of oneness. And now's the time to pull back. Those of you who are parents who have small children, I have a little bit of advice for you. Every time you go into a museum, you go into Chuck E. Cheese, what do they want to do? They want to stamp your kid's right hand. Right? I tell my kids, no one stamps your right hand ever with anything. When they go to the craft fair, what do they want to do? They want to paint the little butterfly on your kid's forehead. I tell my kids, no one ever puts anything on your forehead. Nothing. And in fact, at the museum right now, at least, you can get away with it because they'll stamp it on a card and hand you the card. They have other ways they can do it. But that right hand, and I tell them for religious reasons, we don't permit that in our family. And they all go, oh, okay. But you got to get your kids used to that now because you're not always going to be around. Your kids are going to grow up surrounded by this. And someday, they're not going to know unless you teach them. And now's the time to teach them, and that's an easy way to do it. Right? All right. And in closing, let me say that this is the reason why I became a Christian. Because my grandmother sat me down in a little kitchen years ago and told me something that at the time seemed outlandish to me. And I made a promise that if it ever came to pass, I would pull out my Bible and I would read it. And I've done that. And if it hadn't been for that experience in that kitchen, I don't know that I would be a Christian today. I don't know that I would know not to take the mark of the beast when it came. We have an obligation to our children and our grandchildren. We have an obligation to our loved ones to let them know this. And let me say that this evidence is so indisputable. If and when this mark comes and they're putting a mark in people's right hands, can you imagine how that could have possibly been known 2,000 years ago? It's a perfect opportunity for us as Christians to spread the gospel and to let other people know the glory of our faith and the truth of our faith and the validity and the reality of it and the truth of this little book.